I came in peace this morning, guys. I promise you. My intention was to wake up this Good Friday and bask in the glory of F1. I wanted to make a video talking about Damon Hill and times when I've been rendered emotional, times when I've cried. And then Noddy Cameron went back and watched the McLaren. I can't even talk already. I'm losing it. Rant incoming, scorched stuff. The Mercedes Australian debrief, and I've lost my mind again, haven't I? I desperately do not want to be ranting about Mercedes each and every single time. I promise you, God's honest truth on this Good Friday. I don't want to be doing that. But when I watch the debrief, I'm like, what are we doing here? And again, it's James Allison, who, by the way, is a legend of the game. God tier F1 buffing, aero, strat, all of that good stuff. He's a legend, right? 8-time constructors, Ineos spud, America's, he's proper. He's an absolute legend. And we have to do table setting in this because all of this context matters. But you know, I desperately wanted to react to it with you guys, but I'm scared that I'll get copywritten, especially because I'm going to talk about it in such disparaging terms. Look, here's what I went through. And the interviewer did a fantastic job. Mercedes employees, some chap called Cameron. Great name, Mihak. What's going on, Lee? But the first question, how do you recover emotionally, says Cameron of Mercedes AMG Petronas. To which James Allison, God tier F1 buffing, responds, I wasn't even there in Australia. What do you mean you weren't there, James? What do you mean you weren't there? Now, I know there is a back-to-back trade and some of the guys stay home because of obviously the time difference with Australia. It makes sense that they can kind of clock on and clock off, almost work around the clock. But James Allison is not that guy, surely. Surely you want James to be there in person. Now, we know James has got other interests and he was seconded to Ineos so that he could compete in the America's Cup and he wants to do boating and all this other stuff. But I'm sure he's just recently extended his contract for an additional 3 years. And that the plan was for one James Allison to focus entirely on this W15 car now. I know that F1 is a bit techie, like work from home is a thing now in 2024, especially after COVID and all that. But surely in the F1 paddock, you need to be there in person if you're James Allison. So when he says I wasn't even there, I'm like, what? And Toto won't be there at Suzuka? What are we doing? What is this work from home settings genuinely? Is this what we're doing here at Mercedes now? As if there's not value to be added from your key personnel, your senior guys being there at the... Can you imagine Hannah Schmidt, as an example, not being there at the track? Or GP or Christian Horner? Christian Horner's not having that. Listen, on the rumour mill, Andrea Stella, he was one who wanted to work from home as well. So I hear on the grapevine. And look what happened to that. Listen, I just don't even know what's going on here again. Genuinely, the mind boggles. If I'm ranting, you guys tell me out here, like, fact check me. But as I'm looking at it, you mean to tell me that James Allison wasn't even there in Australia? Why? So then James continues that he's gearing back up, ready to come back to work. Even that terminology. And I want you guys to pay attention to this terminology because I'm like, I don't know, smacks of politicking. James sounds more like a politician than a racing man with some of the words that he's using, and we'll get to that. Listen to this. James continues, what we need to do is discover why the car performed like that, what we need to do to fix it, and how we can do that before the next race. What are we doing? The mind boggles. The terminology again, lift and drop from any management book, any managerial manual that you've ever read. The who's, the what's, the whys and wheres. And it sounds pretty and very sexy on paper, yeah, but less talk and more action at this point. Now, I know it's a debrief, so what am I expecting James Allison to do other than talk? But this, what? What are you going to solve for this madness, this chaos in such a short space of time between now and Suzuka? Is that what we're proposing, really? Like, what, you're going to understand why the car's so... Like, mate, you've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of heavy lifting here. You can't do that in a couple of race weekends, right? And that they don't speak to this makes me a bit concerned. And if we're talking about the why what happened in Australia happened, well, because your car is rubbish and your strategy was poor and you were just piss poor all over the shop. On all accounts, where were Mercedes good? Like, where were they good? Non-rhetorical question. What we need to do? Well, you need to, in the words of Christian Horner, you need to fix your fudging car, don't you? That's what needs to happen. And how? Well, mate, I have no idea, chaps. This is why you wanted to be starting on this car back in 2022, not the first month of 2024. The lead time is too long. We're swimming upstream. There are too many. There's a plethora of problems, too many of which you need to solve for. How do you juggle so many balls concurrently? How do you spin so many plates simultaneously? Got to land something here, and the first order priority is to land the car, which has been bloody rubbish. Cameron, the interviewer, continues, how do you make sure that this, being the double DNF, which is piss poor for Mercedes, let's be honest, how do you make sure that this doesn't happen again? Now look, let's talk about the double DNF, because what's going on, you guys heard me talking the other day, partners and sponsors of Mercedes AMG are looking elsewhere. So poor have the performances been. It's only race 3. We are early on. It is far too early for sponsors to be thinking about looking elsewhere. This speaks to the extent of the problems facing the boys and girls at Brackley and Brixworth. To that question, James Allison responds, a procedural, there we go, he gets it in the end. A procedural approach is fine. Is it, James? Is it really? How is that? How is your process approach fine? It can't be fine. If it were fine, then we would not be here in March of 2024. I'm not sure it is fine. Okay, so if you're going to couch it in terms of the double DNF, maybe. But as far as getting first or second, obtaining 25 points, maximising for your utility over the course of a race weekend, your procedural approach is absolutely not fine, if I can get my words out. The skill of the drivers will get us by because they're very good at keeping it on the island. Go on and let's talk about this. A, there's acrimony between your drivers, and any fool can see that. B, George Russell. Listen, I've said it a gazillion times, and I will reiterate for the purposes of this video. George Russell, especially towards the latter stages of the race, isn't the best at keeping it on the island. And I'm not going to diatribe nor dissect for his interaction with Fernando Alonso. Julian Palmer has done that for you and says, as a racing driver, as a former F1 driver, that George Russell has some blame to take from that circumstance. He had gap still between himself and Alonso. This wasn't Alonso and David Coulthard, a proper brake test all those years ago. George lost control of the car. So what are we talking about, James? And this goes to my point about credibility. We're saying things here that are ostensibly, evidensibly incorrect. What do you mean the skill of our drivers? They're both very good at keeping it on the island. Well, George makes these unforced errors periodically. That's his first this year, and there will be more of that ilk. Singapore last year, as an example, et al. Reliability is a strong point for the team. No, excuse me, Mr. Allison. Reliability is a strong point for all F1 teams in 2024. Let's not give ourselves a tick for stuff that just comes with the territory. More focused on race pace, because if you sort that out, says James, the reason for that, the season will be all right. The foundational things are in play. What we need to do is sort out high to low speed. No kidding, Sherlock. You've got a fundamental issue with your car, mate. Let's not talk about things like everything's peachy and rosy. What's the difference between FP2 and FP3, says Cameron. Here's where it gets techier. Cameron responds, a patterns emerged. In practice sessions, the car looked quick, but in the paying sessions, being quali in the race, we lost speed. Go on then, here's where it gets techie. Because all I keep seeing from Mercedes is these vanity runs in practice. That's when the car looks quick, when it hasn't got no bloody fuel in there. So as a comparator, when you compare it to the other cars, of course it looks quick because they're all doing race programs. Look towards the meaty end of the podium of the pack, being Red Bull and McLaren. In practice, they're doing deep dives, long fuel runs, right? So when you see Lewis Hamilton pop to the top of the timing sheet in FP2 when everybody else is on these race simulations, of course, I mean, it does well for the confidence, right? Lewis Hamilton fans around the world are rejoicing. We're back. But it's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's not logical because you're not comparing apples with apples. They need to stop that. Allison continues, the car's at its best when the session is at its coldest. So now remember we talked about all this procedural stuff. That they were sound. But how can those procedures be sound if the car is at its best when the session is at its coolest? And the paying sessions 9 times out of 10 thus far year to date have been in warmer climes. How does that even make sense? Why would you ever design a car that worked best when it mattered least? You guys explain this to me now. And we're talking about the processes being sound. WTF, man. Like, I just don't even... Again, I have to go into full scorched earth Cameron mode when these guys are saying these things that are evidently incorrect. The processes can't be sound, James. They can't be. If we have a car that at its best, when it performs well, isn't in the paying sessions, because you know when the calendar is right. They publish this calendar months ahead. So you know what the temperatures are going to be. You know the time of day when quali and the race is going to be. So surely design the car, look over the course of the 24 race season and design a car that works best in those circumstances, right? Work out the average, the mean, even circumstances. 90% of the time we're going to be in cooler climes. It's going to be warmer. What's the play? And then design your car to meet that specification, surely. So I don't want to hear anything about procedurally. I don't want to hear anything about procedure and process. Not if we are where we are, because it doesn't make sense. And I can't square the two with my noddy F1 mind. A pattern has emerged. Yeah, you're damn right. A pattern has emerged, James Allison. What are you talking about? A pattern of failure, because failure is becoming a habit. Now, look, you are the 8-time Constructors' Champions, Mercedes. However, what have you done for me lately? Your title sponsors aren't concerned about legacy and history and all that stuff fades to black, right? It's fugazi. What have you done lately? I said again, I was at work the other day and we were talking about one of the businesses. They were looking to present numbers year on year that dropped. What? How can that? Doesn't even work. Well, the story is this and no. Present numbers that are growing, otherwise you are dying. It's a competitive game, this. F1 now more than ever. Zero-sum game. If you are losing, if you are falling as versus your competition, then what are you doing? Sponsors aren't going to be interested in you. And you guys have seen that lately in the news that Mercedes sponsors are looking elsewhere. They've lost their competitive edge and they've lost their biggest marketing brand asset in one Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. What are we talking about? Cameron continues, is there still correlation issues? Again, that must be a rhetorical question, surely. What are you talking about? Is there still correlation? How could there not be correlation issues, Cameron, and Mercedes still experiencing this absolutely god tier level of underperformance as far as their car? James Allison's response. And again, this is where I start to lose my mind. Listen, everybody makes mistakes, yeah? Everybody makes mistakes. That's not indicative of incompetence necessarily. 2022 we can forgive. 2021 divesting out of a car, not developing the 2021 car when they're in the middle of a gunfight with Max Verstappen. I can even forgive that, yeah. I can forgive that. But rolling forth the dodgy W14 into 2023, I'm not sure I'd ever be able to forgive that. And that speaks to this point. This is the language that I'm talking about that for me is indicative of poor, noddy, low-level decision-making processes. Remember we were talking about procedure a couple of minutes ago. Here's what James responded. There are always correlation issues. What are you saying, James Allison? How is that a response to the question? You know what Allison reminds me of? This is where I lost my mind, yeah. As soon as James started talking like that, I'm thinking, wait, hold on. Am I watching Newsnight? Is this Bojo or Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak? Like, am I watching a politician or Trump or Joe Biden? Am I watching a politician responding to questions? Because that's a politician's response now. You were asked, are there still correlation issues at Mercer? What are you talking about? There are always correlation issues. What we're talking about here, James, is a difference in extents and not kinds. Yeah, of course, there will always be correlation issues. But here at Brackley and Brixworth, ours seem to be more material than the rest. Have you seen what Red Bull are going on with? Have you seen how Ferrari have improved year on year? Their correlations are very different in terms of their extents as versus those experienced by the boys and girls at Brackley at Brixworth. And that, Mr. Allison, is what we're talking to. Allison continues, simplified models are good for steering you in one way or the other. What's steering you in the right direction of a design philosophy that works, Mr. Allison? That's what we're talking about here. What your simplified models are good at steering you in the right direction. Correct me, guys. Listen, if I'm going scorched earth too soon, if I'm premature, you guys correct me in the comments. Because listen, I'm taking this dude at his word. He said, not me, that simplified models, their simplified models in brackets, are good for steering you in one way or the other. So what then? Extending from that, what has happened to these sound simplified models over the past 24 months? You know, the ones that indicated that it was a good idea to roll forward the W14 design from 2022 to 2023. That, by the way, was a decision that even by team principal Toto Wolff's metrics was the worst decision that he's ever made in his racing career. So where are these simplified models? And how are they sound as far as their procedures? This just doesn't math. I can't connect the dots here. Really, really struggling. And I don't want to go scorched earth. It's Good Friday. Happy Good Friday to all of you out there celebrating. And I watched it and I was just lost for words. I was like, no, I've got to talk. Using those as a guide to make sound strategic decisions. What are we talking about? Using those as a guide, et al., to fix high to low speed. Exactly where they're rubbish. James Allison said that they need to use these simplified models that don't work to fix their differences, their correlation diffs, particularly on high to low speed turns. You guys have seen the footage of Lando Norris gapping Lewis Hamilton around Jeddah Corniche to the tune of 7/10 around one turn alone. Listen, to call those issues, to call those differences and problems is the understatement of the year. They've got it wrong massively. And I don't think, listening to James Allison's rhetoric, not only do they not know how to fix for this, but I don't think they realise, or at the very least they're not portraying that they realise the extent of the problem. These aren't problems, right? This is like fundamental, like it's serious. They're at DEFCON 5 here, and their tone doesn't speak to that. James is like, yeah, well, James is working from home at the Australian or working from Brackley. James, we need you there, sir. Everybody else was there. What, you think Red Bull are having that? Okay, so they will have lower level colleagues, non-key personnel working in Milton Keynes, whilst the rest, the key personnel, will be on the grid in Australia. There are things that you will miss, James. There are things that you won't be able to see. And again, my guy Peter Windsor has spoken about this for the longest time. There is technical arrogance at some teams. Mention no names. Mercedes, AMG, Petronas. They fail to take their head above the parapet and see what's going on. Use your common sense sometimes, because if we can see these things, then surely God tier F1 buffing, racing mind that is James Allison, you'd expect him to be able to see these things, unless I'm missing something. Maybe I'm being daft and presumptuous. I don't know. Why the soft compound tyres? Why start Lewis on them? Continued interviewer Cameron of Mercedes AMG Petronas. Well, he says, and this is the answer that I was looking for from Mercedes at Jeddah. I feel like they're a day late and $1 short with that strategy. Remember you that they didn't pit Lewis, did they? They didn't pit Lewis, and at that debrief, they said that they didn't anticipate such an early safety car. All the while, every time there has been a safety car, every time they've raced in Saudi, there's been a safety car anywhere between lap 1 and lap 20, every single time, without fail. So extrapolate that out. There is 100% hit rate. Surely you build a strategy based upon the most recent precedent. And they did that. Okay, so it didn't work out. Here's where we're talking about processes. They did that for Australia and it didn't work out right. Because if you look at recent precedent, there is always a safety car, and most of them happen early, just like at Jeddah. So in this instance, for putting Lewis Hamilton on the soft compound tyres, listen, it didn't work out. Sometimes outcomes, there is a mismatch between outcomes and processes, and I will take that. I can absorb that. I'm an accountant. Like I'm of rational mind. Like I'm not just going to freak out for freak out's sake. I can take that one, chalk that up to the game. But it feels like they're a day late and a dollar short. Where was that rational, strategic mind at the Jeddah Corniche circuit in Saudi Arabia? Day late and a dollar short, and every second, every point counts, right, in 2024. When you have a machine that's not capable of getting you 25 points, that's not capable of competing with Scuderia, Ferrari and the bulls that are red, you need to use a bit of devil, right? Roll up your sleeves, invest in a bit of skullduggery, and resourcefulness is the terminology that I'm referring to. Be resourceful. You saw it when Red Bull had a slower car. They didn't hesitate to play a strategic joker, did they? They were always onto it. So why now Mercedes still peacocking as if we're in like 2017, as if they have the dominant W12 and have a second in hand of the rest of them? Because they're not adapting to their new circumstance. In 2024, average mediocrity as far as their machinery is the new normal. Adapt to that then. Maximise for your operational upsides, your pit stops, your strategy, morale within the team. Oh, you got Toto Wolff talking about red won't suit Lewis Hamilton and he needs to get used to picturing our rear. What are you talking about? How is that going to optimise for morale over here in 2024? Soft compound will forgive them for. What happened to the power unit, James? We still don't know. What we were saying a second ago about adaptability and agile thinking, what you still don't know? Mate, it's nearly Suzuka. Like, come on, chaps. Hurry up and get the stuff back to the factory and deep dive for it. Do a cheeky post-mortem and give us, forget us, give yourself the feedback requisite to improve upon that for the next race weekend, which, by the way, is less than 7 days now. Suzuka, go on then. And we're going to have to talk about this. Tyre temp issues. So they need to, before Suzuka, here's what they need to do. Remember James talked about the hows and the wheres and the whys and the whats. The classic managerial speak. Again, lift and drop, copy and paste from any management book and leadership book worth its metal. Whatever. Politicking out here. But you know what? Less action, more talk is the mantra of Mercedes, and whatever, I don't care. Tyre temp issues is what they need to solve for. High to low speed balance. And George will be here at the factory tomorrow to try and fix for those things. Honestly, beggars belief. I just don't know. They have a clear manifesto, concludes Allison, for what we want to do, what we need to execute between now and Suzuka. Clear manifesto. Are we talking about next year's general election or what? Like, what are we on about? Is this politics or is this F1? Manifesto. I just don't like the terminology. And no, there will be those of you who say, listen, Cameron, just leave him alone. Like, stop. This is saloon semantics. Stop nitpicking at his syntax and his choice of words. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. But I think it does matter. Have you guys ever heard of pathetic fallacy? This is a tool used in literature where the weather's meant to represent a change of mood. It's a metaphor of sorts. And for me, as I'm listening to Mercedes and their terminology, the language that they're using, it's pathetic fallacy of sorts. It's indicative of a technical arrogance. You're using all these words, all this politic terminology is for me indicative of the mantra for Mercedes, which for the longest time has been more talk, less action, and they need to reverse that if they're going to solve for their ills in the next 2 years. Forget this year. This year's a write-off. 2026 probably needs to be their focus now. And that, ladies and gents, is an absolute shame for all concerned, for Lewis, for George, for Toto, for James, for Mike Elliott's legacy, for us, the fans, and the watching F1 world. It's another Lewis Hamilton season in the latter stages of his career gone to waste, and somebody needs to take some sort of responsibility. Sort out yourselves, Mercedes. It's not good enough, man. And when I hear this chat again, listen, is talk going to solve for the car? Absolutely not. If James Allison changes his verbiage, the syntax, the phrasing that he uses to refer to their circumstance and the ills of Mercedes in 2024, is that going to fix the car? Absolutely not. But would it make me, as a person who's been involved in middle management and has sat on board meetings, would that give me more confidence? 1 gazillion%. Because at the moment it feels like these lot are throwing darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on. They don't know what's going on, and they're trying to dress it up in words that speak more to a Rishi Sunak than it does being a Ross Brawn or an Adrian Newey, because those bods don't tend to talk in those terms. But I digress. You guys have been legends. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe. Between now and next time, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.